All right, next up, muscles of the neck and torso, front and back. Let's take on the muscles of the neck. We're going to start off with the scalenes. They're an important one that we'll see on the surface. And it's a muscle, or a group of muscles of 3 muscles that the Greeks called the uneven muscles. And they show up a little bit between your sternocleidomastoid mastoid and the anterior, that's the front edge or flap of your trapezius here. So there's a little bit in this hollow here that we want to think about for what's showing up there. So the scalenes are there. All right, so the first one will be the anterior. That means that's the one closest to the front. And what we want to look at is the first rib here. Okay, and there's a little bit of a bump here called a tubercle. And we want to attach the front scalene there. And then we want to go up to our cervical vertebrae. Remember, there's 7 of them, and I've got numbers on here. We want to go from 3 through 6. And on this wing of each vertebrae, it's called the transverse process, there's an anterior and a posterior. So there's 2 little sort of tubercles or bumps there too that you can attach to. But we want to go from 3 through 6. And this is it's going to attach on that first rib. It's going to go behind the collarbone, and it's going to come up, and it's going to, right, it'll have a belly here, and then an attachment point on each of those 3 through 6 cervical vertebrae. Okay. That's the front part of the scalene. Then the middle part, a little beefier. We're going to come a little bit more along the rib here. This is the first rib again. And we want to attach from our second cervical all the way down through the 7th. And then there's going to be a second bump here on this transverse spine, transverse process of the spine. It's called the posterior tubercle. And so we want to bring, and this guy's going to be a little wider here, but all along this rib there's going to be an attachment point going towards the back. And again, the belly is coming up and then shooting off with an attachment point to each of these guys. So I'm drawing them a little bit separate to see them there, but that's the middle scalene. And then the back scalene, known as the posterior scalene, is going to actually hook on our second rib. So here's the cartilage coming down. So near the back again, and it's going to come up, still behind the clavicle. And it's going to pass the clavicle here and hook on the fifth and sixth vertebrae. And it's also hooking on that posterior tubercle of the transverse process. All right, so those are the scalenes. Okay. So 3 of these guys. All right. We can come over to the middle here and sort of take on the same idea. So the front scalene, the anterior one, remember we're going to be on that bump. Really it's kind of hidden here right now behind the clavicle. Okay? And so we want to come up and we want to go 3 through 6. And we'll be hooking on this front process called the anterior tubercle of the transverse process. So 6, 5, 4, 3. That's the front scalene. The middle scalene, again, is going to work its way around towards the back of the rib. And we won't, I guess it's a little bit bigger belly. We might see a little bit of it here, but it's all going to take on this shape like this. And then we have on the second rib here an attachment point coming more towards around the back again, but we would have and hooking into 5th and 6th here. So those scalenes are hooking into those upper ribs. They're of course, they help you move your neck a little bit, but they're really there to help you breathe too, to lift up the ribs when you're breathing. All right, scalenes are going to hook on the skeleton here. The front scalene is on this tubercle towards the front of the rib here, and remember it's hooking up through the third through sixth vertebrae. What it's hooking to are these anterior parts. They're called the anterior tubercles of the third through sixth cervical vertebrae. Then the middle scalene is going to hook towards the back of this first rib, and it's going to come up, and it's all the way from 2 all the way down through 7. Okay, and it's on this posterior tubercle, if you can see those there. Okay, and then the back the back scalene here is going to hook on the 5th and 6th cervical vertebrae on those same posterior tubercles of the cervical vertebrae. Okay, let's take a look on this anatomical figure by Andrew Karst at the scalenes. They're sitting right here between clavicle and scapula, anterior of the front, middle, and back, posterior. And over on this side, we've got a couple more of the superficial muscles where you can see this is trapezius, this is sternocleidomastoid. But in between here, you can see where the scalenes show up. All right, let's talk about the muscles of the neck as we go towards the back now. And as we follow the base of the sort of crest or ridge of the back of the skull here, the nuchal ridge, we're going to have the external occipital protuberance right there, that little bump. And there's a ligament that attaches there from the 7th cervical going up, called the nuchal ligament. And that helps to hold our neck up so we can be upright. All right, let's go after the deep muscles of the neck here. The first one will be the Semispinalis Capitis. And that's going to attach along that nuchal ridge or that crest there. All right, we're going to be attaching the semispinalis on that articular process, so just back of where we hook the scalenes on. And we're going to start with the 4th, and we're going to come up along that nuchal ridge here. And we're going to come up like this, and we'll have one finger sort of do that. Then we'll go down, let's see. And then we'll go down to let's do it like this. Should we catch the 4th here? Then we'll go down to the 5th. And then the 6th. And the 7th. And you can start to see what's going to happen here. Then we want to go down from the 1st all the way down through the 5th or the 6th cervicals in here. So we'll be going down through, well, on the inside, of course, of the scapula. You just follow these down here: 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. So all of these in here will be coming up along that ridge. Okay, and we can do that back here too. So starting with the 4th here, we're going to right on that articular process here, on the transverse part of the spine here, the vertebrae. We're going to come up, and this will be the widest out here. Not all the way to the edge, but kind of to the edge there. And then we'll come up. You can see how we're getting here. All the way down the 5th or 6th. And then we could do that on both sides. Okay, Semispinalis Capitis. I suppose we might see a little bit of that coming up from the front here, along the crest, coming up from 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, maybe a little bit right in here. Okay, coming over to the side view here, the nuchal ligament runs from the 7th cervical up to the base of the nuchal ridge here. So we'll follow that guy up. This is part of that group that's holding your head up. Right? So that's the external occipital protuberance there. Okay, so the next muscle we're going to go after, the splenius capitis, is one that hooks, sort of ties into that nuchal ligament. And what it's going to do is it's going to run across, in fact, it's going to cover, in fact, we should put that up there. This is our Semispinalis Capitis. And what we're going to draw is the splenius capitis. Okay? So it's going to run from the mastoid process, or that big guy right here, about 2 inches back along the skull. And it's going to tie in from the 7th cervical along a nuchal ligament here, down through the first 3 or 4 thoracic vertebrae on the spinous processes. So that's the ends here. Okay? So what we want to do is just kind of draw that up here. And then as we come down, and then we go down behind, of course, the scapula here, down to the 3rd, 4th spinous process. So let me just erase that a little bit, see if I can clear that up for us. So we might have a little bit of the, so right in here, coming up. So all of that there. Splenius capitis. So we might catch a little bit of semispinalis right back here again. Let's take a look at splenius capitis on the back view. Right? So we're going to run from the mastoid process, coming back about 2 inches here. We'll start to cover the semispinalis capitis, and we're going to come down right on that bump of C7. Kind of come up like that. Oops. Come up along C7 here, all the way down to T3, T4. Might take an eraser to get that. Right in here, splenius capitis. Probably could take the same on the other side, right? Mastoid process coming back about 2 inches down to C7. Spinous process down to T4. There, up through there, and along that ridge. Semispinalis Capitis. All right, on the muscles of the back of the neck here, the Semispinalis Capitis sits right here along the back of the skull. It's covered by the thin sheath of trapezius. So we see its form, its influence on trapezius, but we don't actually see that muscle. It's deep to trapezius. But coming closer here towards the ear here and the mastoid process along the side of the back of the skull is the splenius capitis. So we definitely see that. Then we have the levator of the scapula, which will come up next. And we have here's the middle scalene. You know, we spoke about the middle, the front and back scalenes there. And then we're going to cover that all up with this big muscle here called the sternocleidomastoid that's going to come down and hook both in the sternum here and on the clavicle. Okay, now we're going to take on the levator scapulae. And they're going to run along this medial border of the scapula and up to C1, C2, C3, C4. So if you remember, the atlas had a very wide set of transverse processes. So we want to start down at the bottom here. And these are what we're moving towards, what I call the superficial muscles of the neck and back. So these are going to be on top now. Although this runs quite alongside splenius capitis, but we want to come up from this lower corner here up to where C1 would attach right there, okay? With a finger of the levator scapulae. And then we can do that on the other side too. Right along that. Okay. And then what's going to happen is the other 3 vertebrae are going to be tied in one at a time, sort of coming up this way. And you want to work your way up the scapula until you get to the 4th cervical. So up to 2 and 3 and 4 there. Okay. All right, let me see if I can maybe clean that up a little bit. Levator. Oops. Scapulae. All right. So let's come over and take that on from the side view here. The levators, again, starting at the lowest edge here, the medial border here of the scapula, up to C1 here. And then we're going to have the others coming up on the inside of that. To C2, C3, and C4 there. We're going from the bottom of the medial border of the scapula And we're going to the transverse process here, so I need to scooch this over a little bit. So we're coming up more like this kind of an angle. That's from the bottom of that medial edge. Then we're coming up to the second, third, and fourth cervicals. Okay. So let me just clean that up a little bit. So what we want to have, then is more of a sense going that way. So coming off of that vertebral edge. That's the levator. Behind that, we want to do the splenius capitis. Remember what the splenius capitis is tying into is that seventh cervical with that nuchal ligament running up. So that looks a little better to me. Okay? Splenius capitis, and then coming around to the levator. Okay, from C1, 2, 3, 4. Again, the levator is above the semispinalis there. Okay, then on the side here, the levator is coming up to the transverse processes, so the outside edges from, and the one is, the atlas is very wide on C1. And then what we really want to kind of do there is just bring up the quality of having the splenius stay to the back of semispinalis. All right. And then that, the splenius again, it starts at C7. So maybe you can see that difference there. Semispinalis is to the inside here. Right, and splenius capitis is coming around from the mastoid process. Then you have semispinalis capitis. The levator is coming up from below on that medial edge of the scapula. From the front here, we might have a little bit of splenius capitis running along the mastoid processes back here and coming down from C7 through about T3 or T4. So we might just get a little bit of influence of splenius capitis. All right, and then with the levator's scapulae, we're going to start on that medial edge coming up to C1. That's going to be the furthest out. Again, if we were seeing through to the scapula, that levator is coming up and connecting to the transverse process here of C1, the atlas. Then the transverse process is C2, and so on down here. So we want to feel that coming forward of the splenius capitis and semispinalis capitis. With splenius capitis coming down from the mastoid process, but going behind, going behind the levator scapula. All right, so we've got a lot going on in the neck. If it becomes real confusing, it's okay to think about the neck. Really, in the end, it's a cylinder, right? It's a cylinder that's round. We have, remember we talked about the skull being about 5 eyes wide. We talked about the opening of the first set of ribs here being about 4 eyes wide. So the neck has this quality of kind of narrowing as it comes down. But we don't really probably think of it that way, right? You think of the neck being wider at the base. And that's really due to the next muscle, the sternocleidomastoid. It's so important that it not only can flex your head and neck forward, it can all by itself, it can laterally pull your head down, okay, either way. It's going to connect in two spots. Why it has such a long name, sternocleidomastoid, is it's going to go from the sternum, the clavicle, for the mastoid, sternocleidomastoid. Okay, so let's take it right here. Well, right on top of the sternum here, in the manubrium, we're going to have a finger that comes up to the inside of the clavicles. This is going to be the most visible, most prominent muscle on the neck. And then we're going to have a second finger that's going to come up along the clavicle here. It's going to tie in to the belly of the muscle. Now the belly of the muscle is going to, we'll get it right here. Where we're headed is the mastoid process, right, which we just get probably a hint of here, right behind the ear hole on each side. But that's going to be a big bellied muscle of the neck. So we're going to come up like this, and we're going to come up like this, and then we're going to put that other finger in there. So we're going to come up like this, we're going to come up like this again. And then finger here. So let me just erase for a second and write the name in for you. So covering all of these up. So the sternocleidomastoid. Right in there. You might remember our medial scalene, the middle scalene, that came around on the outside of the top of the first rib. We would probably see a little bit of that right here. Middle scalene. And then we have the levator of the scapula coming up along that medial edge there. So we might see just a little bit that of the levator, scapulae. And that's the front of the neck. All right, so on the side view, here's our sternum. Remember, the manubrium's right here. So out in front of the collarbone, on the front here, we want to take a finger up. And here's our whole mastoid process. And we're going to cover all of that. And we're even going to come around a little bit behind it. And then we're going to attach along that first bit of the clavicle here towards the sternum. So that finger is going to come down. So that's going to come up. And this is going to belly up. So let me clean that up here. Is it easier if I color it in? I guess so. sternohyoid. So let's come back in here. We've got the middle scalene again. It's coming around on that first rib. We'll get a little bit of that there. And we'll get the levator coming down. But we can cover up a lot of that earlier stuff there. So Semispinalis Capitis, the levator, the middle scalene, sternohyoid. All right, on the back view here, we've got Semispinalis Capitis, Splenius Capitis, but then from the mastoid running back here is where we would hook on sternohyoid. So that would come down, and it would be coming down towards the front here. Coming up along the mastoid process, coming down, fingering down into the front here on the sternum and the clavicle. So from the back view, we're going to come back along the edge here from mastoid process back to Splenius Capitis. Just keep a little bit of that triangle open there we talked about. Okay, so that little triangle here is right here. It's between what is the middle head of the splenius muscle and the sternocleidomastoid coming down here. What we have alongside there is the levators, splenius capitis, but it's hollow right in here. Ultimately part of a bigger triangle, really, where trapezius comes down, wraps over the front of the clavicle here, and sternocleidomastoid comes down here. That kind of opening you'll see in the shoulder. All right, let's take on a couple of details of the neck. What we really didn't cover at all was the breathing tube that you have in front. Right? Of course, then you swallow in the tube behind that. But let's take on a bit of the shapes that we might see there. We talked a little bit about the hyoid, right? And we'll tie that in with a couple of thin muscles here in a minute. But if we sort of draw that out here, maybe just a thin bone. So this is horseshoeing around, sort of, okay? And of course, the breathing tube is cylindrical when we put it all together here. But that would be the hyoid. And immediately below the hyoid, we'll have the thyroid cartilage. And it kind of has a bit of a heart, or like a couple of clover petals. It kind of has a shape like that, and then it will come down. And then you can kind of think again about that being kind of roundish there. So that would be your thyroid cartilage. You can even kind of put a detail here, maybe of it sweeps down in front and then goes back behind a little bit. And then we have a series of other cartilages beneath that. The next one is called the cricoid. But there's a little gap here, and then it's going to show up, the cricoid, and it's just, yeah, sort of horseshoes, or it wraps around the neck there. Okay. Cricoid cartilage. Then we kind of have sort of attaching on the sides here all the way up to the thyroid cartilages, the thyroid gland. So it's going to hook on the side here, come down and around. Okay. And then we can kind of wrap that up maybe with a little bit more of that kind of shape. Thyroid gland. So we have a bit, so that's going to come over cricoid here. All right, so we have a bit of a hollow in here and in here, right? So right beneath all of this, then we would have a little bit of more cartilage that would go. And these little straps of cartilage will go down into the neck. So you kind of take your neck down like that. So we can kind of put the sternum a little bit right below here to kind of let you know where we're at. Then we have the fingers of the clavicles coming out. So this is the manubrium of the sternum going into the gladiolus. So a little bit of a hollow here again, but these guys right in here would be the trachea. All right, let's take this on from the side here. Hyoid bone that we've drawn in here. Then we want to go after the thyroid cartilage, so it has that kind of wing shape to it. That sort of petal shape. And then it's going to sweep back, and then it sort of comes back up and around. And of course, our sternocleidomastoid is going to start to cover all of this. But we would have a thyroid gland, this shape right here, attached along the side of it there. Again, that's behind the sternocleidomastoid. That's going to come down like this. And you would have a little bit of the cricoid cartilage poking out right here. And then beneath that would be the trachea. All right, let's take on a couple of the muscles of the front of the neck. The myohyoid is one I like to think about as sort of the shelf between the chin here and the hyoid bone. So you can, from the side view, we could just sort of draw it like that. And that is going to be called the myohyoid. Myohyoid, that shelf right there. This, if we were looking at that, say from below, might remember our three sort of planes to the jaw there. We have sort of the front of the jaw, the mandible, and then the side, and then the side. Right? And then we have that kind of a, kind of small here. And then if we're, so this is looking sort of straight up at the chin, or someone's got their head tilted way back. Then if we had the hyoid bone down here, coming around, that myohyoid is going to attach itself like this. So underneath the chin here, myohyoid. So it's really, it helps to lift the floor of the mouth when you're eating. All right, there's another one that we can go after, the gastric. It helps, opens the mouth and lifts the hyoid. And it's going to, well, if we're kind of looking, maybe it's easier back here first. It's going to sort of attach something like this to the mouth and to the hyoid. But then what's kind of cool is, and really interesting, is there's a little tooth or a little bump right on the top of the hyoid there. This guy is going to run sort of threads along that. And then it's going to come over to your mastoid process. So these guys would be, if we had the whole skull here, they would be sitting back here somewhere. And it's going to come through and thread to those. And I guess I'd have to say that the myohyoid, maybe we'd have a bit of the shelf there, but we aren't going to see all of this really unless we're looking up or the head is coming up. All right, so with the gastric, put a little more of a belly to it here. Coming back, the mastoid process is there. Really hooking right onto the front of the jaw there. Then we're going to have the autohyoid. That's going to come down from near the front here of the hyoid, and it's going to take an interesting path here. It's going to actually hook on the inside of the shoulder blade, or sometimes a ligament there, but right, this is called the coracoid process, right inside of here. And we're going to end up with a bit of a hollow here, an opening in the shoulder, but we might see it come up right through there. It's going to go up like this, and then it's going to go up to the hyoid like this. The autohyoid. So autohyoid going behind the sternocleidomastoid, but in front of the scalenes and the levators that we drew earlier. So what that would look like over here is hooking just to the inside coracoid process. You might see a little bit of it right here, but then coming up like this. All right, so one more, coming down from the hyoid again. We're going to hook just where the manubrium meets this notch of the clavicle here in the sternum. And that's where it gets its name, the sternohyoid. So it's going to come up right from here and make its way up like this. This will be the sternohyoid. So from the front here, sternum, of course we've got the sternocleidomastoid mastoid in front of this, but hooking on that little joint of sternum to the clavicle there, sternohyoid, coming up right along here to the hyoid bone. All right, back over here where we just drew the enlarged front view, we would see the sternohyoid coming up right here. And so this would be the muscle there. And we would see the thyroid and cricoid cartilages sort of poking out from inside there. All right, let's talk about the muscles on the front of the neck. Here's the hyoid bone, and the myohyoid is going to run from here, and it sort of triangulates out underneath the chin here, attaching along the whole front of the mandible there. So that's sort of the shelf, if you will, of the chin back to the hyoid before you have neck. Okay, so that's an important plane. We'll see that, of course, more if the figure is looking up. The gastric is a really cool one where it hooks onto the front here, and it catches that little point there, and it runs around and it hooks again on the mastoid process. Okay, so that's where that runs through. Okay, and the autohyoid is running up from here's the coracoid process. So we're talking about the scapula back here, right next to that on the inside here. It's going to hook on there, and it's going to run up through here, and then up to the hyoid. Okay, that's the autohyoid. And then the sternohyoid is going to hook on right here where the clavicle articulates with the sternum, and it's going to run straight up to the autohyoid. Okay, and then right in between those guys, you would have a little bit of the cricoid and the thyroid cartilages showing up there, and the thyroid gland on the sides maybe a little bit, and right down here is the trachea. Okay, so we've covered the muscles of the neck. Next time we'll work on the muscles of the torso. So thanks for joining me.